Hello, everybody. Welcome. Come on in. We are very excited about tonight, our second installment in the Wild New York series, New York City Celebrity Birds. We're happy to have you here tonight. We are led again by the author of Wild City, A Brief History of New York City in 40 Animals, Tom Hynes. Please feel free to chat and comment here in the chat tab. And if you have some questions, place them in the questions tab right next door. That'll be easier to spot during Q&A. If you have any audio issues or video issues with the presentation, it is best to refresh your page. Don't worry, you'll be brought right back into the presentation. And as always, our insiders are joining us tonight. And they get access to all of our virtual programming for as little as $10 a month, which includes unlimited access to our video archive and all of our virtual talks and virtual tours on demand. You can try us for 1 month free using the code JOINUS in all caps. The link is there. There's also a link to buy this incredible book, Wild City, if you have not already, although I know a bunch of you on this talk already have it. And I am Chief Experience Officer Justin Rivers, although my name says Nicole. I'm on Nicole's tonight because I'm going to be ducking out. Nicole will be coming back at the end of the presentation to do Q&A with you, as I am going to be on a podcast. So let me say hello to a couple of people. Hello, Jeffrey, Marion, Richard, hello from Hollywood. Talked to you this morning. Klaus from the Flatiron District. Morbo from southeastern Pennsylvania. Welcome. Nancy from Tuckahoe. Lydia from Dumbo, which I know is where Tom is.
Yeah, I know her.
Janet from Brooklyn. Leslie bought the book. Leslie Day, she bought the book. And Morbo says he loves his Wild City book. Morbo, by the way, is Robert Morbeck, in case anybody doesn't know. That's my nickname for him. And Mel from Long Island. I hope everybody enjoys the talk. Hopefully, if all goes well, you will not see me again tonight, as I am going to duck off and let Tom do his thing. And Nicole will be back for Q&A. So, Tom, it's all you. Have a good talk.
Let's take flight. Thank you so much, Justin, or Nicole, whatever you want to be going by tonight. Good luck on your podcast.
Freaky Tuesday. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for joining me. And thank you to Untapped New York for what is the ongoing series of New York City wildlife. This is our second installment, which is New York's Celebrity Birds Exposed. So this is also a good opportunity for me to say a few words about the book's illustrator who did this illustration here. She also did the illustration of the cover here, as well as dozens more throughout the book. Her name is Kath Nash. She's also based in Brooklyn. If you are lucky enough to work with her, I can't highly recommend it enough. So New York obviously has always had a love affair with celebrities, including certain historically famous and infamous non-human bird celebrities. They've been fawned over in the press and covered breathlessly and attracted crowds just like their human counterparts. But the reason that New York City has so many celebrity birds is because New York City has a lot of birds. All told, there are about 400 species of birds have been recorded in New York City. Some are resident, some are migratory, and some have been introduced. Some are even escaped pets. Now, New York City has all these great birds because New York City has all these great habitats. And when we take a 10,000-foot view of New York City, we see that there are all these rivers and bays and just different opportunities for birds great opportunities for resident birds. And the one thing I always love to talk about when we talk about New York City wildlife is really the ecological diversity of New York City. One stat I have to mention is that Yellowstone National Park has about 2.2 million acres. And within it, they have 66 ecosystems, which is why it's the jewel of the national park system. However, Manhattan, just Manhattan, with its 2,200 acres, once had 55 ecosystems. So you can see there's a real biological opportunity. There's diversity and habitat opportunity here. There's a feeling that if if the United States had been settled west to east, or colonized, if you will, west to east, that New York City may have been left as a national park. And it probably would have been the jewel of the national park system, as we see, on par with even Yellowstone. But it's not just the diversity of habitats and this geographical and natural advantage that New York City has. New York City is also right smack in the middle of the Atlantic Flyway, which is one of 4 migratory superhighways that birds travel through here in North America. This is from the Fish and Wildlife Services. So that brings us to our first celebrity bird, number 1. And you'll notice the colors are blue and orange for the Mets and the Knicks, of course, but those are New York City's official colors, which go back to the Dutch. So we're just going to give them a little branding shout out here. This first bird is a painted bunting. This is a real bird that was really in Brooklyn in 2015, in December of 2015. This bird had never been seen in Brooklyn and rarely seen north of Arkansas. It was a pretty big deal. The New York Times covered it. People were out in Prospect Park for days, just sort of breathlessly tracking this bird's every movement. And this is just a sample of some of the incredible birds that pass through here all the time. We're in spring migration now, and there are just hundreds of birds moving through here. And if you have the opportunity to get to Greenwood, to get to Prospect Park, Central Park, or any of the other great parks in the city, you won't be disappointed this time of year. And then again, I think in the late summer, early fall, when they're sort of headed back south, there's another really great opportunity. But there are great opportunities to see birds all the time in New York City. Number 2 on our list of celebrity birds is the female painted bunting. And she was seen in January of 2020 in Brooklyn Bridge Park, not far from where I am today. And again, this is not some escaped exotic pet. This is not some bird that was off course. This is part and parcel of what New York City birds have to offer. And number 3 on our list of celebrity birds is the broad-billed sandpiper. Now, this bird was spotted in Jamaica Bay in 1998, and it was the first time this species had ever been spotted in the lower 48 states. According to an article in the New York Times, it is one of the hardest in the world to see. It's a scarce bird with a limited distribution, and everyone who builds a world list is eager to bump into it. What's interesting about this is that this bird was probably lost. It was probably on its way to Australia or perhaps India, and they think that it got lost in the Arctic Circle. And what was also really remarkable is that it stayed in Jamaica Bay for about 2 weeks. So again, there are all these incredible opportunities to see these very unique birds, even ones that really don't belong here. And that takes us to our number 4 celebrity bird. This is the Western Tanager, as you can see this screenshot of a tweet from Manhattan Bird Alert. This bird wasn't seen in Central Park or out in some stretch of Staten Island or Breezy Point. This was in a tree in Chelsea on 22nd and 10th Avenue. So this is really like in a neighborhood block, this very rare bird. And these birds are not found really east of the Rocky Mountains. I mean, this bird was also particularly very lost. I believe this bird can still be seen. I think it's moved over to the east side towards Carl Schurz Park over on the East River. And I will also just take this opportunity to promote this Twitter account, at Bird Central Park, or Manhattan Bird Alert, if you will. This is a guy named David Barrett, I believe. And David runs what I think is one of the best accounts on Twitter, sharing all this great information about where birds can be found. And, once you begin to realize how great birding is in New York City, one of the other delights of that is how fun the birding community is online. And they are very active and they're very supportive with one another. And it's a great resource, actually, to get out there and find different birds that you want to see. I have countless times I've seen a notice that a bald eagle can be seen, or this, that, or the other thing can be seen. And sure enough, I've been able to get out there and see it. So if you have a Twitter account, I can't recommend this account enough. Number 5 on our list is the Canada goose, but more specifically, the Canada goose that brought down this plane in the Hudson River in, I think it was 2009. It's more of like an infamous bird, more of a notorious bird, since they tried to kill Captain Sully. But these were migratory birds just doing their thing. They were, minding their own business and ran into unfortunately an airplane. And just one thing about geese, I get asked a lot if what I learned about animals and writing this book and what changed. One thing that didn't change for me is a hostility I have towards geese. I went into this book not liking geese, and I came out of writing this book still not liking geese. But what's sweet is that there are a number of goose advocates in New York City who are out there protecting them. There's a guy named David Karapkin who started Goose Watch in New York City. He's featured in the book. He's now like a licensed wildlife rehabilitator and rescuer. He's a great guy. And if there's someone out there advocating for geese, then there's somebody for every species, I guess. Our next celebrity bird is the European starling. These are very common birds. You've probably seen 10 of them today if you stepped outside. They also, a flock of these also hit an airplane with much more disastrous results than the geese. In fact, in October 1960, 62 people died in a plane crash when an Eastern airline flight crashed outside of Logan. Now that's a Boston story, so why is this in New York? Well, these birds are not native to the United States, and they were starlings, along with dozens of other non-native birds, were introduced here by a group called the American Acclimatization Society in the 1890s. Now, the thinking was that America's wildlife was not sophisticated enough, and that's kind of crazy given how dope New York City is for birds, for all the reasons we just discussed. I mean, this is one of the most premier places in the world to see birds. So the idea that people were like, we need to put better birds in New York City is just beyond foolish. But it actually turned out even worse than that. So what happened was this group endeavored to introduce the 60 birds mentioned in the works of William Shakespeare into the park. And most of those birds perished their first winter here. They're not meant to survive in New York City, and they got picked off. It didn't really work. It was sort of a foolish endeavor to begin with. But the birds that were released here, depicted in this illustration by Kath, on a March morning in 1890, our man here, who's opened up the bird cage, is Eugene Schifflin. He was a pharmaceutical manufacturer from the Upper East Side, and he released a few dozen of these starlings into Central Park. Now, as I mentioned, all the other birds that they released didn't really fare that well. But today, there are about 100 million starlings in North America. They eat crops, they bully other birds, they brought down an airplane, and they all can trace their roots to this ridiculous thing that Eugene Schifflin did in Central Park. And I will just quote a little bit here from Shakespeare. I went and looked up the quote that inspired this release, and it's from Henry IV. And I've read a lot of Shakespeare, but I don't know this play that well. The line is kind of a throwaway. It says, "Nay, I'll have a starling shall be taught to speak nothing but Mortimer." And I think that was said by Hotspur. But oddly enough, later in that same play, there's sort of a prophetic line against doing things like this. And it says, "When nature is diseased, strange eruptions can break forth," which is, as I say in the book, he could have, Eugene Schifflin probably should have spent a little bit more time paying attention to Shakespeare's words than to Shakespeare's birds. But yeah, this has been like a real Jurassic Park type situation right here in Central Park. And that's relevant, of course, because birds are just tiny dinosaurs. Our next celebrity birds, number 7 on the list, are also an introduced species, but it's definitely a nicer story. These are the monk parrots of Greenwood Cemetery. Now, these birds are native to Argentina, and the question is, how did they get here? And the details are very murky. There are a lot of theories. Some say they were released pets. Some say they were part of escaped cargo from JFK. But however it happened, these parrots have made footholds in the area. And along with Greenwood Cemetery, there's another pandemonium, which is what you call the collective noun of parrots, over at Brooklyn College. Now, those parrots, they run into things with utility companies and Con Ed because they like to make their nests on these like transformer boxes because they're warm, and Con Ed has to disrupt them all the time. But oddly enough, at Greenwood, there are no neighbors to really disrupt. And what's more, the structure that they're sitting on, get another look at it here. Structure that they sit on is a brownstone arch, and it was designed by, I believe, Richard Upjohn, who also designed Trinity Church. Now, I don't know much about the biology of bird shit, but their bird shit, I guess, doesn't really damage the brownstones, so there's really no problem with them there. And what's also really nice is that they are a very reliable bird to see. I mean, I went to Greenwood Cemetery this weekend. I saw all kinds of things, and I know there were later in the day bald eagles and all other kinds of exciting things, but it's almost hard to miss the parrots at Greenwood Cemetery. They're right at the entrance. They're loud as hell, and you know, if you're in the area, they're worth seeing. Now, number 8 on our list is the peregrine falcon. Specifically, this is the peregrine falcon at 55 Water Street downtown. You can watch this was, I think, from a webcam. I think I captured this like a week ago. Now, what's interesting about the peregrine falcons, of course, is that they are not an introduced species, but more of a reintroduced species. So peregrine falcon, fastest animal on the earth, can, you know, fly over 200 miles an hour, just this beautiful apex predator. Excuse me, was very close to going extinct in the 1950s and in the 1960s due to DDT, and was weakening their eggshells, and nobody really knew what was happening. And this group of birders and professors from Cornell basically single-handedly saved the species from extinction. I won't get into it in this talk, but they had really, you know, unbelievable methods for their captive breeding program. It involved these like specially designed hats that the falcons really were very fond of. And I will let you, if you have time, you can Google my name and peregrine falcons and read a whole article that I wrote a few years ago about this very, very bizarre story. But that was very successful in the end, because now New York City actually has more peregrine falcons per square mile than anywhere else in the world. And this is actually, I chose this picture because one of the advantages that New York City presents to this bird, and we talked earlier about, we have all these different habitats, we have this great location in the migratory superhighway. But for the falcons, we have we have ledges. And the ledges actually approximate how these birds would nest in the wild. They don't really have nests, actually. They just make these little scrapes in cliff ledges. And the ledges of our skyscrapers really mimic that very well. The other thing that really helps them, obviously, is plentiful pigeons. So they can hunt all the time. They can hunt in smaller ranges than they would in the wild. So peregrine falcons are really thriving here and are really one of the most successful wildlife reintroduction stories for an endangered species out there. It's a really great story. So number 9 on our list of celebrity birds is not really a celebrity at all, but it's just a bird I want to talk about for a second. This is the American coot. It is sort of like a wading bird. You can see these in Central Park in the reservoir. I can see them all over. Now you're probably asking, well, why are you showing this American coot? Because I really want to show you their feet. These are the American coot's feet. And this is the American coot's feet per scale. And this is just another reminder that dinosaurs didn't actually go extinct. They just turned into birds. So the next time you're at the park and you see one of these little black ducks with a white beak and red eyes, look for their feet. They're really unbelievable. Number 10 on our list of New York celebrity birds is the OG. This is the Mandarin duck, the hot duck, Central Park of 2018. I tried unsuccessfully to rebrand this duck as the Gucci duck. I can't really say why. I just thought it made sense. It just rolled off the tongue and it never really stuck. I put it in my book. People still call it the hot duck, and that's fine. This bird, as I mentioned, arrived in Central Park in 2018. They are native to, I believe it's the east coast of China and the Sea of Japan. In Japan, they are not from here. They are from very far away. So there was a lot of questions. Did this bird get lost? Did this bird, how did it get here? And some answers can be seen in this picture of the same duck, the Gucci duck. You can see on its right foot this little band. Now that's something that wildlife rehabilitators and maybe some pet owners do to kind of track their birds. And if the bird is injured, then that gives the wildlife rehab folks some information about where its nest might be, where it came from. It's just very helpful for wildlife experts. But it also tells us that this bird did not just magically appear from Japan. Still, I think there was something that really resonated with people with the hot duck, with the mandarin duck. I think that for me, there was something about, it was very oddly beautiful. It was brash, it was bright, and it was definitely out of place. And that made him sort of right at home in Manhattan, which is a place where nobody's really from, but everybody's welcome. And what was also really nice about the hot duck was it was like it was all anybody could talk about for a few weeks. And there really were crowds of people who would come out and see the bird. This is a picture I took of, dozens of people trying to get just a shot of this bird. And it reminded me of, like a new restaurant opening or a play that people wanted to see, or even when a few years earlier, the street artist Banksy had a residency in New York. You just had to see it for yourself. And this is what really happened with the hot duck. I mean, and what was great about it is that it brought people out to the park. It got people interested in birding. I know it got me more interested in birding. And like all wildlife, it just sort of one day just sort of disappeared. And it's not clear if it went to New Jersey or if it went to, got eaten by a hawk. But it was this really beautiful moment in New York City and in Central Park. But it wasn't the first famous bird, even in Central Park, and definitely not even the most famous bird. That takes us to number 11 on our list of New York City's famous bird. This is pale male, the red-tailed hawk. Now, pale male was one of the first red-tailed hawks to be spotted in the city in the 1990s, when wildlife really started to reemerge. So, real quick, the big moves or the big strokes of New York City wildlife is that prior to Henry Hudson arriving in 1609, this was like a really, really rich place for wildlife. Then the Europeans come, we trash the place, we pollute the waters, disease the air, kill all the animals. In the 1960s and 1970s, we basically hit our low point. The environmental protection laws are put in, the EPA is established. And about 20 years later, a lot of the animals that I talk about in my book begin to reemerge, and pale male here was really one of them. Now, what made him extra interesting is that he showed an adaptation. This is a nest that he made and then was later modified by the building owners, but began to nest on a building, which gave him some kind of advantages. It's not really clear exactly what, but it was definitely an adaptation that the species had made that was not obviously present to them, before we had built these huge structures around town. Now, pale male also has lived twice as long as most red-tailed hawks are supposed to live. So it's been to his advantage, and he's had something like 8 or 9 documented mates. There's somebody once told me it's like 25% of the red-tailed hawks in the city all draw their line through pale male. So he's, a pretty famous bird. And there was sort of a controversy around this nest that he had built. This was at, let me check, 927 Fifth Avenue, which, if you don't know an exact address, that's a nice part of town. That's looking over Central Park. That's, Upper East Side. And this hawk is up, 20 stories above the front door, dropping dead pigeon carcasses and dead rat carcasses down on the front door. Plus, across the street, you had dozens of people taking pictures with huge telephoto lenses into the building. You can kind of understand why the building didn't love this. So they tried to evict pale male. And that caused all bloody hell. This I've talked to a lot of people in the birding community in New York City, and I've always likened this to the Woodstock moment. Like, you kind of had to be there, and everybody remembers it as this sort of like galvanizing moment in New York City birding scene, if such a thing exists. But including these protesters was Mary Tyler Moore, who actually lived in the building and made it her cause. I once saw a clip of her on David Letterman where she didn't even go on to promote anything. She just wanted to make the case for pale male. And I think pale male is still alive, which is really a record-shattering thing for a red-tailed hawk. And not only that, I mean, a lot of ink has been spilled about pale male. There have been 4 books exclusively about pale male, and then I have 1 chapter in Wild City about pale male. So show me a bird in New York City that's had more written about it. I don't know that you can. But it's not the only bird that has a book written about him. Obviously, that brings us right to number 12. This is Tango, the penguin of the Central Park Zoo. Now, this is a book that was written about Tango, but also about his adopted fathers. So before Tango was born, there were 2 male chinstrap penguins at the Central Park Zoo. They were named Roy and Silo, who were exhibiting very expressive and ecstatic behavior towards one another that you would normally see a male and a female penguin exhibit towards one another. If at the risk of being anthropomorphic, they were totally gay for one another, and they kept trying to build a nest, and they saw other couples incubating an egg. So they didn't know any better. So they got a rock, these penguins, and they tried to sit on the rock. Like, they really were like trying to be parents. And a female at the zoo had laid 2 eggs, and that's a problem in penguin biology, I guess, because a penguin couple can only really raise 1 at a time. So the zookeepers, thinking quickly, gave the egg to Roy and Silo, and they sat on it and, raised it, and Tango was born, and that's their adopted baby daughter penguin, which is just like the most beautiful story about tolerance, but also adoption. And it's just like this wonderful, beautiful New York City thing. Maybe not surprisingly, there was some controversy about this children's book, which is just completely absurd to me. Because it's just about, there's really nothing salacious in the book. I can promise you that. Nevertheless, there was a PTA group in Shiloh, Illinois, that requested to have the book banned from the library. So as I like to say, if you're ever feeling overwhelmed in life, just go to Shiloh, Illinois, because there's nothing else going on there. That's where the people have a lot of free time and nothing else going on. So shout out to Shiloh, Illinois. Staying in Central Park, we're going to go to our number 13 on the list. This is the black-crowned night heron. This is actually, his name is Oliver, the black-crowned night heron, and I didn't know this bird had a name. This is a photograph that I had taken, and I apologize, it's not as good as some of the other ones in here, but as you can see in the reflection, that's the Plaza Hotel. So this is right when you get into the park on the southern edge. This is around 61st Street. And you can very reliably see this bird. I came to find years later that I wasn't the only one admiring this bird. It had been named Oliver. This is a better picture of the same one. What I like about the black-crowned night heron is that they're kind of a gateway bird for the aspiring birders out there. They're sort of common, but they're also cool as hell. They have these taxi cab yellow feet. They have these bright red eyes. You can watch Oliver hunt for fish, right up close and personal. He's sort of used to people. I don't recommend you touch or disturb him, but you really can get really up close and personal with this bird that's kind of spectacular. Not an everyday bird. This is a very cool bird. But if you can't make it to Central Park, they really are all over the place. This is an illustration from Kath did from the book, and I've seen black-crowned night herons at the Harlem Mere. I've seen them at Brooklyn Bridge Park, Prospect Park. I've seen them in California. And this is from their nesting ground in the Upper East River. That's North Brother Island in the background, and if we're being very technical, the bird would be sitting on South Brother Island, which is a smaller island next to North Brother Island, where the black-crowned night herons nest, and it's a protected island. You can't go there. I wrote to the Parks Department, as this author, saying, "Hey, I'm writing a book about New York City wildlife. I'd love to come out and visit the island." And they were like, "Good luck with the book. You're not going to the island." So there are protected species out there, or their habitat is protected, but they are spectacular birds, and just another example of what's available to New Yorkers interested in learning about birds. Moving on to number 14, we're going to move into the owl portion of our conversation. So New York City has had owls before, but this last year really felt like, I don't know, something different. And I've been paying attention to New York City wildlife pretty closely for the past couple of years. And it really felt like this was the year of the owl. So this guy is a northern saw-whet owl. And he came to New York City by way of the Rockefeller Christmas tree. They chopped it down, and they're hoisting it up on 55th Street over there, 50th Street. And they noticed this little guy in the in the tree. And, you know, that's not unlike how a lot of animals came to New York City. Starlings and pigeons and rats and mosquitoes, and even bed bugs, which is to say they came here against their will. Honeybees too, actually. Obviously, this was a bit surprising and maybe even a tiny bit traumatizing for the little bird. But luckily, New York City has a wildlife rehabilitation center. They're called the Wild Bird Fund. They are the greatest people in New York City. And he was taken there after being discovered and released outside of the city. I want to say up in the Hudson Valley, but don't quote me. They named him Rocky for the tree, obviously. And while that was remarkable, there were more and more owls began to appear in the city. And this is one of the great horned owls of Central Park. Now, normally this would be a big draw. These owls are the biggest owls in North America. They're not particularly rare to New York City, but this one has been pretty reliably visible in the past couple months in the park. And I believe, if I'm reading bird Twitter correctly this week, there might even be another one in Central Park, which is just remarkable. But then this guy showed up last fall, which is a bit more rare. This is a barred owl. He was quickly named Barry, the barred owl. And this was the first wild owl I'd ever seen in my life. I went to Central Park one afternoon after reading about it on bird Twitter. And within 5 minutes, I was looking up at this bird. And when I tell you, this bird turned around with his owl head and looked at me like I owed him money. And he looked right into my soul. And he was a quick celebrity. And you know that he's a quick celebrity because there are parody Twitter accounts pretending to be that owl. And at my last count, one of those accounts currently has like 50 more followers than I do, a real person. So that's how you know he's famous. And this is another picture of Barry, the barred owl, looking at his reflection in one of the fountains in Central Park. And I saw this picture like a week ago, knowing I was doing this presentation, and then I couldn't find it. And I said to my wife, I was like, did I dream this picture? And I went on Twitter and I said, bird Twitter, does anybody know this picture I'm describing? And sure enough, people responded and sent me this picture. So I just want to thank Manhattan Bird Alert again for all that he does, but also for sourcing this photograph for me. And by the way, the best way to spot a bird in New York City, or one very easy way to spot a bird, is to spot the birders. So this is how I knew Barry was nearby when I went to look for him. There were a crowd of 10 or 15 of these huge, you just kind of look for the lenses. And if you are walking through Central Park or Prospect Park or wherever you are, Greenwood, and you see a group of people like this, they're chasing something, and it's probably pretty cool. And, you know, it can't hurt to ask, what do you got? What are you seeing over here? And I have seen dozens of birds this way, just kind of walking through the park and being alerted to it by different people. You know, these birds are hard to spot. They are naturally camouflaged. So, you know, don't be surprised if you can't see them on your own, and you can use a little assist here from the birding community. Now, this was a big deal. You know, Barry the barred owl was a big deal. But like we could even catch our breath about it, this guy showed up. Number 17 on our list of celebrity birds, the snowy owl. This was something I actually couldn't believe. This is like a real Harry Potter like magic bird. This is not something that like should be in Central Park. And it arrived during the day. It just like popped up. This was where it first was spotted in Central Park next to a baseball field. It was the first snowy owl spotted in Central Park in 130 years. Now, snowy owls will show up in New York City from time to time. Excuse me, but they're usually out by like Breezy Point, you know, maybe some places in the Bronx or Staten Island, but this is Midtown. I mean, this was like a really, really big deal. And it showed up during the day, which is, kind of also pretty great. But, it was enough, like, that it showed up for one day, but it stuck around for a couple of weeks. And this is from an article, actually, I wrote for Untapped New York called My Saturday Night with the Snowy Owl, where in the dead of winter, I think this is funny, it was Super Bowl weekend, and I went to go see the superb owl. I wish I could have made that up. That's how it actually shook out. And I went up there based on where bird Twitter said the owl could be spotted, or where the owl was spotted the night before. And there's a pump house on the reservoir on the northern side, and you can kind of see it to the left of this image here. And on the Friday night before, the snowy owl showed up at like 6:31, and sure enough, the next day it showed up at 6:31, and there were like 150 people there. It stayed for 30 seconds, turned his head left and right in that like impossible owl way, and then flew off, and people applauded. And I don't know if it was because of COVID or the dead of winter or what, but it was a real magical moment. It was a really, it was the most crowded thing I had done in a year, and definitely the most like fun Saturday night I'd had in a long time. And it wasn't just, we're talking about celebrity birds. There were some real celebrities there. I later found out that Steve Martin was there, and he could very well be in this picture. So it really was a really kind of a special moment in New York City wildlife. Now, I got to asking myself, why are there suddenly so many more owls? And I have a theory, and I think it has something to do with COVID-19. So just bear with me here for a second. So when the city went into lockdown last year, we had a lot of budget cuts. One of my personal favorite programs, the organic recycling, which is food scraps and composting, that got cut. Sanitation cuts happened. And what that translated to acutely in New York City was a lot more trash on the streets, which then translated to a lot more rats. And there were reports of rats all over Central Park. And I had never seen rats, not very often seen rats in Central Park. I was seeing rats in Brooklyn Bridge Park, where I live, with more frequency. And I wondered if these guys had come to fill that ecological niche. This is the Barry the Barred Owl, taking one for New York City. Probably does 2 of these a day. I mean, talk about someone helping out the city, just taking rats out, smiling for the camera. This is our boy, the Great Horned Owl, just protecting his rat feast this is from a couple of days ago when it was windy, when you just got to hold on to that rat, you've been fighting for it. And not to be outdone, our buddy, the Snowy Owl, is taking down a couple rats. They said he took down 2 or 3 a night himself. So, there were a lot of jokes in the beginning of COVID and shutdown about nature healing. But I actually do think this was a case of nature sort of filling in the void and fulfilling that niche. New York City, the peregrine falcons do this with the pigeons, and the red-tailed hawks are able to hunt more in New York City with tighter, smaller ranges than they would in the quote unquote wild. And I think that's bringing the owls in too. And I think New York City has this great birding scene right now, and I will move on to just number 18 on our list. This is the Kentucky warbler. This is a bird that I knew nothing about a week ago. This is number 18 on our list. And I don't know that there's anything particularly remarkable about this bird other than I've never heard of it, and it seemed to cause a lot of excitement on bird Twitter. And that's sort of the point, is that, there are all these exciting birds, like, even since the snowy owl came in February, there's already new exciting birds, and there's probably more coming tonight and tomorrow as spring migration gets into more of its throes. So there really are like a ton of opportunities out there for us, for those of us interested in seeing like some of the wilder parts of New York City. And with that, I just want to mention that none of this is happening by accident. That New York City is having this great wildlife moment, and it wasn't really guaranteed. This is a book from 1962, which I'm sure all of you know. It's called Silent Spring. It was by Rachel Carson. In a lot of ways, this book really kicked off the American environmental movement. We were talking earlier that New York City's wildlife and nature trajectory is probably one of most that most of the United States experienced. You had this untold natural wealth and biodiversity and just like riches and riches for days. We squandered it. And we really hit a low point. And the silent spring that Rachel Carson is talking about here is because there were no more birds. And that's how she kind of put it together, that something was wrong. And something was wrong. We were really polluting our city. And this is a photograph, I believe, let me just check my notes. This is from 1966, November 24th. This is taken from the Empire State Building. If you've watched Mad Men, there's an allusion to this in Don and Megan's apartment. Anyway, this is not like this is also the Vampire Weekend cover, I think, for their third album. But this is like actually a pretty tragic moment in New York City. 160 people died because of this smog. This was like a real low point in New York City. And I'm not surprised that it was in the late 60s. That's the same time the Hudson River was being polluted. That's poisoned, rather. It's the same time the Cuyahoga River was catching on fire in Cleveland. This was the low point of the American environmentalism. And out of this came the Clean Water Act, came the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Protection Act, the EPA. And that's why we have this rich array of celebrity birds and also coyotes and whales and dolphins and seals and all this other great stuff that's happening in New York City. It didn't happen by accident. There are all these groups out there also who are fighting for it. I mentioned I Goose New York. That's David Karpkin's Goose Watch NYC. God bless him. I don't know why anybody would want to defend a goose, but he's out there doing it. Central Park Conservancy, Prospect Park Alliance, and New York City Audubon are just a few of the many great groups out there keeping New York City clean for humans and animals alike. And also your federal government and the United States Environmental Protection Agency. A lot of people will say that environmental regulations are bad for the economy, but I don't know. I think smog killing 168 people is pretty bad for the economy too. So I'll take a cleaner environment, whatever it costs. In shouting out all these great organizations, I couldn't do this talk without shouting out the best, and that's the Wild Bird Fund. These folks are on the Upper West Side. I like to call them the Pigeon Hospital. Here we see some pretty adorable patients, including this little duckling with a cast. In the bottom left here, this woman with the glasses and the turtleneck, holding a duck, I think. This is Rita McMahon. She founded the Wild Bird Fund. They are the only wildlife rehabilitation center in New York City. I've been up there a couple times to talk with them. They are the best that New York City has to offer, in my opinion. They are great people. And they have they gave me their annual intake numbers, and it's something like, I don't remember what it was. It was in the thousands of birds a year, and half of them are pigeons, which are not on this list, but pigeons deserve a lot of respect. Anyway, the numbers work out to something like 8 or 9 just pigeons a day come in there and receive care. And as we are in the throes of spring migration, we have birds hitting our skyscrapers, and they get sort of confused by our bright lights, and they need a helping hand sometimes. And these folks are out there doing it. And also, I think I mentioned great Twitter accounts to follow. The Wild Bird Fund is probably the best account, because what they do is they put out a message saying, there's an injured woodcock, or there's an injured thrush or something or other, can anyone help? And then people respond, and they go and they get a paper bag and they put the bird in the bag and they bring it up, and you just follow these little dramas. And New York City has this reputation of being a tough town, but 8 times a day someone's bringing an injured pigeon up to Rita at the Wild Bird Fund, so we can't be all that bad. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much this is number 19, obviously, of Celebrity Birds, this very big bird here. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. And as a quick plug, our next talk is New York City and beavers, a damn good time, Tuesday, May 25th at 7 p.m. Thank you so much for listening.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tom. We're getting lots of these fun new emoji reactions
I'm
popping
seeing
up.
them pop in. Yeah, they were fun. Yeah, that was great.
So fun. All right. So we have a few questions. If anyone has any more questions that you think of, go ahead and drop those in the chat and the questions tab. Questions tab is preferred. That makes it easier on me. All right. So going back to the beginning. So Jeffrey Barnard wanted to know, for each bird that you showed, are there only are they the only one of its kind in New York? And I don't think so, because I think you showed a few that.
Yeah, so a few of them are. So the painted bunting was the first of its kind, the male painted bunting. I think was the first ever seen in Brooklyn anyway. And they're usually not seen north of Arkansas. You can check any bird, you can put in a Google search with that bird's name and like distribution range or range map, and you kind of get a good sense. Now these birds are obviously not beholden to that. That's not a fence. But the painted bunting was both the male and the female were real rarities. The snowy owl was the first in 130 years. The sandpiper, I think, had never been seen in the continental United States. So that was like a mega rarity. But, you know, the starlings, the red-tailed hawk, the peregrine falcon, even some of the other owls, they are a little bit more common. But I think what happens in the age of Twitter and Instagram is that they kind of take on this celebrity and people name them. And there's this whole school of thought that like maybe that's not a good idea to anthropomorphize birds and animals. I hear that argument. I just think that whatever gets people excited about wildlife and taking care of birds, if it's a funny Instagram personality or Twitter account that has more followers than I do, I'm not bitter about it. That's great, because I think in the end, we want people to care about the city. We want people to care about wildlife. And if some coal plant is going up and say, well, it's going to kill that owl you follow on Twitter, well, maybe they'll fight that. You know, I think whatever, you know, we kind of are on an all hands on deck situation with our extinction crisis and our environmental crisis. So whatever brings people into the tent, I think is a good thing ultimately.
Yeah, of course. All right. Melissa wanted to know, are the monk parrots still by Brooklyn College as well?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. And I grew up in the suburbs in Connecticut, and I see them up there. So they're a hardy bird. And, you know, we were talking about the birds that were introduced into Central Park by the Shakespearean crowd. You know, those birds, a lot of them were not really equipped to survive the winter. Starlings were. And, you know, a century later, the monk parrots were. You know, they were able to kind of figure this out. And I really love the monk parrots. I don't think I mentioned in the book, I don't think I mentioned in the talk, but they kind of mimic the human immigrant experience in a lot of ways. You know, they were not particularly beloved at first. They were really vilified. People were like, this is you know, like some of the dialogue around it or the rhetoric around it is what sounded like what people were saying about human immigrants and you know, which is not okay, obviously. This is a city of immigrants, and now they're like this beloved fixture, and all they want to do is just like live and raise their families and just like eke it out here in New York City, which is what anybody wants to do. So I got a lot of love for the monk parrots, and they're very reliable to see.
Yeah. I love how a lot of the bird stories just mimic classic, you know, New York stories that we all share.
Yeah.
All right. So Gail had a question about the Mandarin duck, the hot duck, the Gucci duck.
Gucci duck. Gucci duck, yeah.
Is there no information contained in the band that the bird had on its leg? I figured there was, but no one looked at the band on the hot duck.
Yeah, no. So I think, no, yes. I think you kind of answered it. So there probably was information on the band, but when the bird was acting wild and was in the pond and was in the park and didn't need like any assistance, so there would have been no reason. I think that would have been, I don't know if the word's unethical or inappropriate, to approach that bird. I think you just kind of let that bird exist. It's not causing any damage to the ecosystem that we can see. It was delighting people, obviously. And I think that the band existed told people something, you know, like that. So we don't know where it came from, where it was going, or where it had been, but we know that it had been somewhere with some kind of human contact. So that was sort of enough, I think, because that was part of the question. You know, when that duck first arrived, it was like, holy cow, did this thing get lost from Japan? Because that was a possibility, because how else did it get there? You know?
Right. Crazy story. All right. From Anne Ray, she says, small question. Didn't the Rockefeller tree owl turn out to be female?
Yeah, I think so. And I apologize. There's been some probably misgendering in these birds. I know that the mandarin was a male, because usually the male have brighter plumage in the bird world, and same with the red tail. With pale male, we knew that he was a male. And also there were two painted buntings, and you could see the difference actually there. I mean, the male painted bunting is every color in the rainbow, and the female painted bunting is just greens and yellows. So you're probably right about Rocky, the saw-whet owl, and I think also Barry. I think I read today, I think is a female as well, and I don't know the genders of any of the other owls. So.
I love the owls. Rocky's my favorite. He's wrapped in that little scarf. Oh, and he's a Christmas owl, which makes it even better.
It's like a children's book, like perfectly packaged. Yeah.
I'm surprised no one has written a children's book. Someone in the chat mentioned that Bette Midler wrote a book about the Gucci duck.
Yes, yeah. So like that, Pale Male's got the most now, but let's check in a few years and see how that ranks.
Yeah, I know the Gucci duck had a lot of T-shirts and stuff made.
I really appreciate you repeating Gucci duck.
I'm just trying to, make your dream of Gucci duck happen. Repetition
is a big part of branding. I hear it. I really appreciate that.
Okay, another question from Mel. Do you know if the butterfly flyways are the same during migration as for birds?
I think they probably are. Listen, actually, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm guessing, but my hypothesis would be they probably are similar, but I think that, well, actually, they both can travel great distances. So I think it has a lot to do with weather and wind. That's the thing. I was going to put a slide in here, but it was just like a little too inside baseball, but I'll just mention it now. A lot of the bird accounts will share like Doppler imagery. And they'll be like, winds are coming in from the southwest tonight, so like Thursday is the day to bird. And that's an example. I don't know if this Thursday is going to be the day, but they will sort of forecast like when the birds are coming based on like 2 and 3 day weather forecasts. And I've followed that last spring migration. And there was some notice from one of these accounts that was like, go birding tomorrow. And I did, and I went to Greenwood Cemetery, and there were like, in every tree, there were like a dozen of these little yellow warblers that I don't know how to identify because they have like these minute differences. But it really, I would imagine the butterflies are sort of beholden to the same kind of weather patterns. And I think butterflies can travel like from one continent to another. So, and I think birds do the same. So I would imagine that they're probably beholden to the same, elements, as it were.
Very cool. All right, we got a couple more. This one's from Kelly. Are any of these bird sightings emblematic of broader changes in New York rather than one-offs? Will we be seeing snowy owls scooping up rats every year?
You might see that snowy owl again. I mean, I think that a lot of it is like they had a good, it's like it worked out this time. So like, why wouldn't they come back when they're passing over? And I think that, with the hawks, these were changes that the hawk made. The hawk was like, and that's a little bit of a broader thing where we built buildings over centuries and then we stopped polluting, and then those conditions made it really good for red-tailed hawks. Ditto peregrine falcons. So yeah, I don't think that they're one-offs. I think that there is really a trend that New York City is getting much more wild or rewilding, if you want to like take a longer view. That I think this is part of the same story, and I don't think, the parrots are escaped pets, fine. But, escaped pets aren't going to do well in a polluted place that has toxic air. So, even they are thriving here because of these longer term generational environmental trends, I think.
Right.
It's a good question.
Yeah. All right, the last one comes from Chris. How many chapters in your book discuss birds, and have you ever thought of writing a similar style book focused solely on birds?
I'm in the table of contents right now, counting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there's 10. I think there's 10 bird chapters. I don't know. I like the idea of urban wildlife stories. There's definitely enough to write about, so it's always a possibility for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. And speaking of Tom's book, Wild City, I'm going to drop the link to for you to get that book in the chat. Again, you can get 10% off from our friends at Books Are Magic when you use the code WILD10 at checkout. It's all the way at the end. There's a little spot for it to put in, like right before you check out. So thank you everyone so much for coming to our second episode of Wild City. Thank you to Tom for hosting us tonight.
Thank you.
I'm going to tell you about some upcoming events that we have. So tomorrow we are back at 6 p.m. Eastern time with writer and tour guide Allison Mayer. She's going to be talking about the great trees of New York. So we're kind of on an Earth Day week nature theme this week. That's going to be about her new map that she just made. That's the Great Trees of New York. Very exciting. And then Thursday, you will see Justin Rivers back with us. Justin, whom I'm impersonating tonight. He'll be talking about the art of the subway. And it will be mostly a repeat of the last one we did back in February, but he also worked in some new works of art to talk about. And then, of course, Tom is coming back in May for his next Wild City chat.
Yeah.
It is about beavers.
Yeah, and I just want to say there's a Leslie Day in the chat, and if it's the same Leslie Day, even if it isn't, a woman named Leslie Day wrote another book about New York City wildlife about maybe 10 or 12 years before I did. It's a field guide to flora and fauna of New York City, and it was instrumental to writing my own book. So if that is you, Leslie, it's an honor to have you here, and I'm such a huge fan. So I'm probably blushing. That's great. Thank you so much for being, and thank you, even if it's not you, for being here. And thank you to everyone else, and thank you to Untapped and to you, Justin, Nicole. I appreciate it.
Love having you, Tom. And like Justin mentioned at the top, if you're an insider, you can register for all of these events for free. Insiders membership starts at just $10 a month. All the links are in the chat. The chat will be available even once we close this. Back, check out all the links and all the good stuff. But other than that, have a good night, everybody. Nice to see you all.
Thanks,
Hope to see
everybody.
you soon. Bye.